haven't guessed it by now, we might be talking about blue crabs here today. Now you just heard that blue crabs live in hypoxic conditions. But what does that mean?
Hypoxia just means that there are low levels of oxygen.
Previous studies showed that blue crabs avoided water that had low levels of oxygen by moving to areas with higher oxygen levels, as crabs were thought to be oxygen conformers rather than oxygen regulators.
Oxygen conformers show a linear relationship between rate of aerobic respiration and oxygen levels. This means that as oxygen levels drop, the rate of respiration steadily decreases. In contrast, oxygen regulators can maintain aerobic respiration rates until a critical oxygen level is reached. At this point, they would either switch to anaerobic respiration or have suppressed metabolic activity. It was originally believed hypoxic conditions cause respiration rate in blue crabs to drop steadily, and crabs would avoid these hypoxic waters due to their negative effects.
However, some researchers argued that crabs being intolerant of hypoxia was counterintuitive since they live in estuaries, which commonly become hypoxic due to human activities such as farming and development. Since it has been shown that organisms that live in these hypoxic conditions often experience strong selection for maintaining a certain level of aerobic activity even in low oxygen levels, blue crabs could have experienced this selective pressure to evolve mechanisms to ensure enough oxygen. With this in mind, new research was conducted to test a new hypothesis about blue crabs.
Researchers at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science conducted an experiment to determine the effect of oxygen levels on blue crabs' metabolic rates. To test this, the researchers used automated intermittent flow respirometry, a technique that had not been used by the previous studies that tested the same effect on metabolism.
Crabs were fitted with the automated intermittent flow respirometers and then were placed in chambers made of plexiglass and submerged in a water bath.
After the metabolic rates of the crabs were allowed to stabilize, oxygen levels were altered. Metabolism was measured by the respirometer in normoxic conditions, or 100% air saturation, and hypoxic conditions at 50% and 25% air saturation. The oxygen levels were monitored by bubbling oxygen for aerobic conditions in normoxia, and with nitrogen gas for anaerobic conditions in hypoxia. Air saturation was lowered until the metabolic rates of the crabs decreased in conjunction with the oxygen levels. The temperature was controlled by using a heater and a cooling coil in the water bath.
The crabs' metabolic rates were all monitored after exhaustive activity. They were flipped upside down by researchers, and when they could no longer right themselves, their metabolic rates were measured.
Regarding aerobic activity, the crabs were expected to have significant behavioral responses at higher oxygen levels. Because the crabs' metabolisms were stabilizing from the physical exertion, smaller fluctuations in oxygen levels had significant impacts on their metabolic rates.
The results of the experiment showed that the hypoxic conditions had very little effect on the metabolism of the blue crabs. This figure shows the metabolic rates after recovery from exercise. While crabs in normoxic conditions show an exponential decrease in metabolic activity after recovery, the crabs in hypoxic conditions show a significantly smaller decrease. This figure most clearly illustrates that in hypoxic conditions, instead of metabolic rates in the blue crabs decreasing at the same rate as oxygen levels, the metabolic rates remain relatively stable.
These results support the hypothesis that crabs are oxygen regulators and can maintain relatively constant metabolic rate in changing oxygen levels until a critical level is reached. This is consistent with other studies that propose that bimodal crustaceans are generally oxygen regulators.
This figure clearly proves that blue crabs are oxygen regulators. The metabolic rate stays relatively constant right until the critical oxygen values are reached, and then there is a constant drop-off in metabolic activity as oxygen levels continue to decrease. Why do blue crabs matter?
Because of human activities, hypoxic conditions have become more prevalent. Organisms who have mechanisms for regulating their metabolisms are more fit to survive in the environment.
Blue crabs are able to sustain their metabolic activity without switching to anaerobic respiration or fermentation until their critical oxygen levels are reached. In the face of the depletion of oceanic oxygen levels, the blue crab's adaptation is important for maintaining biodiversity because aerobic respiration allows for greater energetic production.